On April 5th of 1879, a chain reaction began along the Pacific coast of South America that few people at the time fully understood, even fewer today. Bolivia declared war on Chile. Within hours, Chile answered by declaring war on Peru. What looked like a regional dispute suddenly became a three-nation conflict that would shape the political map of the entire continent. Armies would march through deserts that barely supported life. Warships would hunt each other across the Pacific, and by the time the conflict ended, entire regions would change hands. One country would lose its entire coastline, and the balance of power in South America would shift for generations. To understand how the war began, we have to start with the Atacama Desert. At first glance, it looks like an empty wasteland stretching along the Pacific coast. The ground is dry, the landscape is harsh, and rainfall is almost non existent. But beneath that desert sand lay one of the most valuable resources in the entire 19th century. Nitrate, also known as saltpeter, was a mineral with enormous global demand. Farmers around the world used it as fertilizer to grow crops, and governments used it as a key ingredient in gunpowder and explosives. In the decades leading up to the war, the Atacama Desert became one of the most economically important places on Earth. The problem that was that the borders between Bolivia, Chile, and Peru in this region had never been clearly defined after independence from Spain. The maps were vague, settlements were pretty scattered, and most of the territory was remote and difficult to control. As mining companies moved into the region to extract the nitrate, the question of who owned the land suddenly became very important. In 1874, Chile and Bolivia signed a treaty that fixed their border and tried to calm the tensions. One important clause in that agreement guaranteed that Bolivia would not raise taxes on Chilean companies operating in the disputed area for a period of 25 years. For a while, that arrangement worked. Chilean companies invested heavily in nitrate mines, railways, and export facilities. But the fragile peace would not last. In 1879, the Bolivian government made a decision that would set the entire region on a collision course with war. Bolivia imposed a new tax on a Chilean mining company operating in the port city of Antofagasta. I apologize if I'm saying these words wrong. From Bolivia's point of view, it was simply a domestic economic policy. From Chile's perspective, it was a direct violation of the treaty signed only a few years earlier. You remember that one that said 25 years? Yeah. Chile protested and demanded international arbitration. Bolivia refused. Instead of backing down, the Bolivian government took an even more dramatic step. It canceled the company's license, seized its property, and announced that the assets would be auctioned off to the highest bidder. So, of course, Chile responded immediately. On February 14th of 1879, Chilean troops landed at Antofagasta and occupied the port city without resistance. Most of the people living there were Chilean miners and workers, so the occupation was largely supported by the local population. At first, it looked like a limited territorial dispute that might be settled and resolved through negotiation. But another nation was quietly waiting in the background. Peru had signed a secret defensive alliance with Bolivia several years earlier. The agreement committed to each country to support the other in case of a war with Chile. When the crisis erupted over Antofagasta, Peru attempted to mediate between the two sides while also secretly preparing its military. Chile soon discovered the existence of the alliance and demanded that Peru declare neutrality. Peru would not and could not do that without breaking its treaty with Bolivia. Diplomatic talks collapsed, and the region slid toward open war. On March 1st of 1879, Bolivia officially declared war on Chile. Just over a month later, on April 5th, the anniversary date being today, Chile declared war on Peru as well. So with this, the War of the Pacific had begun. At the start of the conflict, many observers believed that Chile would struggle against the combined forces of Peru and Bolivia. Together, the Allies had, of course, larger populations and larger armies. But the war quickly revealed differences in military organizations, logistics, and even political stability. Control over the sea became the first and most important objective. The Atacama Desert is so dry and so vast that supplying armies over land was almost impossible. Whoever controlled the Pacific coastline could move troops, weapons, food, and water by ship. Without naval superiority, an army in the desert could quickly become stranded. The earlier months of the war were dominated by dramatic naval encounters. Warships from both sides hunted each other alongside the coastline. One of the most famous engagements took place during the Battle of Iquique in May of 1879. The Peruvian ironclad warship Huáscar fought against Chilean vessels in a battle that became legendary in both countries. If you're watching this video, you're going to see that picture on the screen. There's a very famous painting of this battle. Although Peru won that particular encounter, the larger naval skill did continue for several more months anyway. Eventually, Chile succeeded in capturing the Huáscar and securing naval dominance. That victory allowed Chile to transport large numbers of troops along the coast and launch amphibious landings deep in the territory. With the sea lanes under control, Chile began advancing north through the desert. Battles erupted in places that seemed almost impossible for armies to operate in. Soldiers fought in blistering heat across barren landscapes and along coastal cliffs where supplies could only arrive by ship. Bolivia suffered several early defeats after the Battle of Tacna in 1880. Bolivian forces withdrew from the war, leaving Peru to continue fighting largely alone. Chile then pushed deeper into Peruvian territory. In January of 1881, Chilean forces actually captured Lima, which is, to this day, the capital of Peru. This was after fierce battles outside of the city at Chorrillos and Miraflores. The fall of the capital might have ended the war, but instead it had been began a long and bitter phase of resistance in the mountains. Peruvian fighters retreated into the Andes and launched guerrilla attacks against Chilean occupation forces. The conflict dragged on for years, with harsh fighting in remote regions that were difficult for conventional armies to control or even navigate. Finally, in 1883, Peru signed the Treaty of Ancon, bringing the war to an official end. Bolivia agreed to a truce the following year. The consequences were enormous. Chile gained control of valuable nitrate-rich territories that dramatically increased its entire nation's wealth. The country emerged from the war as the dominant military and economic power along the Pacific coast in South America. Peru lost important provinces and suffered years of political instability following the occupation of its capital. Bolivia experienced the most lasting geographic change, though. The country lost its entire coastline and became landlocked where it sits today. This is a situation that still shapes Bolivian politics and national identity. Looking back, the Pacific War, the War of the Pacific as it's known, raises a fascinating question about the true causes of conflict. On the surface, it began with a dispute over taxation and treaty violations. But beneath that political argument lay something far more powerful. Control of the nitrate deposits of the Atacama Desert meant to control of an industry that fueled global architecture and military production. So the war was not only about borders, it was about resources. It was about economics. And it was about which nation could control one of the most valuable mineral regions in the world. So here's the question I want you to think about and to answer in the comments for me. Do you think the War of the Pacific was mainly caused by political tensions and treaty violations? Or was it really driven by the race to control the nitrate wealth hidden beneath the Atacama Desert. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoy deep dives into history like this, make sure you follow my Facebook page and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss the next episode.